What unfolds when a fearless 7-year-old, a lemonade stand, and Clint Eastwood come together? A story that will touch your heart forever. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and please complete our 1,000 subscribers for more inspiring stories. The summer heat hung heavy in the air, the kind that made the pavement shimmer and sent neighbors scurrying for shade. On a quiet suburban street in Santa Clarita, California, life moved at an unhurried pace. Lawns were neatly trimmed, sprinklers ticked rhythmically, and the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint aroma of barbecue from a few houses down. But for one little boy, this wasn't just another summer day. 7-year-old Ethan sat on a small wooden stool, his feet barely touching the ground as he carefully arranged his lemonade stand. It was a simple setup: a folding table covered with a faded checkered cloth, a pitcher of lemonade sweating in the heat, and a small pile of plastic cups stacked neatly to one side. The centerpiece was his homemade sign, a burst of color scrawled in bold, uneven letters. Lemonade for Hope. Ethan's determination was evident in every detail, from the way he adjusted the sign to make sure it was visible from the street, to the bright smile he flashed at each passing car. But what truly set him apart was his purpose. Unlike other kids selling lemonade to save up for a new toy or a trip to the amusement park, Ethan had a far more pressing goal. He was raising money for his own chemotherapy treatments. It wasn't a choice any child should have to make, but Ethan had faced more in his 7 years than most people do in a lifetime. Diagnosed with leukemia nearly a year ago, he had spent countless days in hospitals enduring tests, needles, and treatments that left him weak and nauseous. Despite it all, he refused to let his illness dim his spirit. His mother, Claire, watched from the porch, her heart aching with a mix of pride and sorrow. Ethan's hair, once dark and thick, was now cropped short, a testament to the toll of his treatments. Yet there he was, waving enthusiastically at each passerby, his big brown eyes sparkling with a determination far beyond his years. A jogger passed by, glancing curiously at the stand before offering a wave and continuing on. A car slowed briefly, then drove off. Ethan didn't seem to mind. He simply adjusted his sign, poured himself a small cup of lemonade, and waited. His first customer was a neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who shuffled over with his cane. "How much for a cup, son?" he asked, his voice warm. $1, Ethan replied with a grin. Mr. Henderson handed him a $10 bill. "Keep the change," he said softly, his eyes lingering on the words, "Lemonade for Hope." He patted Ethan's shoulder before making his way back home. Little by little, more neighbors stopped by. Some bought lemonade, others simply dropped a few coins or bills into the mason jar labeled donations. Each interaction brought a new wave of encouragement, but as the day wore on, it became clear that Ethan's goal was still far from being met. Ethan wasn't discouraged. He had no way of knowing that today would be the day everything changed, that someone extraordinary was about to walk into his life and turn his small stand into a beacon of hope. Ethan's journey had started in the most unexpected way. He had always been the picture of health, a lively little boy who spent his days running barefoot through the yard, climbing trees, and racing his blue bike with the tassels fluttering on the handlebars. He was the kind of kid who filled a room with his laughter, whose imagination seemed boundless as he built intricate Lego creations on the living room floor. But about a year ago, everything changed. It began subtly. Too tired to finish his bike rides, frequent naps after school, and small bruises that seemed to appear out of nowhere. At first, his parents thought it was just a phase. "He's probably just growing," his dad, Brian, had said, though Claire couldn't quite shake the knot of worry growing in her chest. The fever started next, low grade at first, then spiking higher and refusing to break. Ethan's appetite dwindled, and he began losing weight at an alarming rate. One day, Claire noticed that Ethan struggled to lift his favorite Lego set, his once energetic little boy now too weak to hold a piece for more than a few minutes. It was then that she knew something was deeply wrong. Claire and Brian took Ethan to the pediatrician, hoping for reassurance but preparing for the worst. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the cheerful posters on the walls did little to ease Claire's mounting anxiety. After a whirlwind of tests, blood draws, and a long, agonizing wait, the doctor entered the room with a look that confirmed their fears. "Ethan has leukemia," he said gently, as though softer words could cushion the blow. Claire's world seemed to tilt. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. She reached for Brian's hand, her mind racing with questions and fears. What did this mean for Ethan? How bad was it? Could they afford the treatments? Ethan didn't fully grasp the gravity of the diagnosis at first, but he could tell something was wrong. His parents tried to explain in simple terms, assuring him that they would do everything to make him better. But as the weeks passed, the reality set in. The hospital became his second home, the nurses, familiar faces. He endured round after round of chemotherapy, the harsh treatments taking their toll on his small body. Claire stayed by his side through it all, holding his hand during the worst of it, whispering reassurances as Ethan cried through the pain. Brian worked longer hours to keep up with the ever-mounting medical bills, the stress etched into his face even as he tried to stay strong for his family. Despite it all, Ethan never lost his spark. He found joy in the little things. A nurse who told silly jokes, a coloring book brought by a visitor, the comforting weight of his favorite blanket. One evening, as he sat cross-legged on the living room floor coloring while his parents talked quietly in the kitchen, he looked up at his mom and said, "What if I did something to help?" Claire knelt down beside him, brushing a strand of hair, what little was left, off his forehead. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked. "What if I sold lemonade?" Ethan said, his voice filled with a hopeful innocence that only a child could have. "People like lemonade. Maybe they'll buy it to help me." Claire's throat tightened. The simplicity of Ethan's idea was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She pulled her son into a hug, her voice breaking as she said, "That's a wonderful idea, honey. We'll make it happen." The next day, they got to work. Ethan sketched out a design for his sign while Claire gathered supplies. The bright colors and bold letters reflected Ethan's determination. Despite the pain he endured daily, he poured his heart into every detail, believing with all his might that his small act could make a big difference. Little did he know his lemonade stand would not only help him, but would also bring his community together in ways no one could have imagined. The next Saturday morning, Ethan's dream of a lemonade stand came to life. The sun rose early, casting long shadows over the neighborhood as Claire helped Ethan set up in their driveway. Ethan wore his favorite yellow t-shirt, the one he insisted matched his lemonade. A floppy straw hat shaded his face, and though the treatments had left him pale and tired, his excitement gave his cheeks a rosy glow. They carried out the folding table and covered it with a checkered cloth Claire had found in a storage box. The pitcher of lemonade, made fresh that morning with just the right mix of sugar and lemons, stood proudly in the center, condensation already forming on the glass. Next to it was a neat stack of plastic cups and a mason jar labeled "Donations," the words carefully written in Ethan's shaky but determined handwriting. The sign was Ethan's favorite part. He had worked on it all week, using markers and crayons to write "Lemonade for Hope" in bold, colorful letters. Beneath it, he had drawn a bright yellow sun and a red heart, the kind only a child could create, imperfect yet bursting with emotion. They propped it up on an old easel, making sure it was visible to anyone driving by. The first hour was quiet. A jogger passed, giving Ethan a friendly wave but not stopping. A car slowed as it approached the stand, the driver glancing curiously but then driving on. Ethan didn't seem discouraged. He adjusted his hat and poured himself a small cup of lemonade, sipping it carefully as he waited. Around mid-morning, the first customer arrived. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, shuffled toward the stand with her cane tapping softly against the pavement. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice warm and gentle. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," Ethan replied, his face lighting up. "Would you like some lemonade? It's $1 a cup." Mrs. Henderson smiled and pulled a $10 bill from her purse. "I'd love some, sweetheart. Keep the change, okay?" Ethan handed her a cup, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you so much," he said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. As Mrs. Henderson walked away, more neighbors began to arrive. A young mom pushing a stroller stopped to buy a cup. Then came a group of kids from Ethan's school, dragging their parents along. They brought energy and laughter to the stand, chattering excitedly as they bought lemonade and asked Ethan about his sign. "It's for my chemo," Ethan explained simply. His honesty was disarming, and more often than not, customers would slip an extra bill into the donation jar, touched by his courage. By noon, word had spread. Cars began to pull over, drivers stepping out to buy lemonade and chat with Claire, who was now sitting in a lawn chair nearby. The smell of fresh-cut grass and the sound of children's laughter filled the air, but all eyes were on Ethan's stand. The highlight of Ethan's day came when Mr. Alvarez, the neighborhood mailman, arrived. He was a familiar face, always quick with a joke or a kind word. That day, he approached the stand with his usual cheerful grin. "How much for a cup, Ethan?" he asked, already pulling out his wallet. "It's $1, Ethan replied, pouring a cup and handing it to him. Mr. Alvarez took a sip, smacked his lips dramatically, and said, "This is the best lemonade I've ever had. Here's $20. Keep up the good work, kiddo." Ethan giggled, his spirits soaring. For the first time in months, he felt like more than a boy battling an illness. He was making a difference, one cup of lemonade at a time. The crowd grew steadily throughout the day, and by mid-afternoon the donation jar was almost full. Claire couldn't hide her emotions as she watched her son interact with neighbors and strangers alike, his confidence blooming with each kind word and gesture. The day felt like a triumph, but Ethan couldn't have imagined what was about to happen next. Someone unexpected was about to arrive, and they would change everything. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows over the neighborhood as Ethan poured another cup of lemonade. The donation jar was nearly overflowing, a mix of crumpled bills and loose change sparkling in the afternoon light. The air hummed with a quiet energy as neighbors came and went, each adding their own small contribution to Ethan's stand. Ethan, despite the heat, seemed unfazed. He adjusted his straw hat, his small hands gripping the pitcher tightly as he served another customer. Claire watched proudly from her lawn chair, chatting with a neighbor but keeping one eye on her son. Then, from down the street, someone caught Ethan's attention. A tall man dressed in a weathered leather jacket and dark jeans. He was walking slowly toward the stand, his movements deliberate, his posture relaxed, yet purposeful. With his sunglasses shielding his eyes and his grizzled face partially hidden by a shadow, he exuded a quiet confidence that turned a few heads. Ethan squinted in his direction, his curiosity piqued. The man wasn't familiar. He wasn't one of the regular joggers or neighbors who often passed by. He stopped a few feet from the stand, scanning the setup with a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Hi there," Ethan said brightly, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the street. "Would you like some lemonade? It's only $1 a cup." The man crouched slightly, resting his hands on his knees so he could meet Ethan's gaze. $1, huh? Seems like a bargain, he said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying the weight of someone who'd lived a lot of life. "What's all this for?" Ethan pointed to his sign, his small finger brushing over the colorful words, "Lemonade for Hope." "It's for my chemo," he explained simply, his tone matter-of-fact but laced with a quiet strength. "I'm trying to help my mom and dad so they don't have to worry so much." The man's expression softened. He glanced at the donation jar, then back at Ethan. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, as if weighing his next move. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his pen poised over the paper. "Ethan," he replied, blinking up at him. "Well, Ethan," the man said, scribbling something onto the check, "I think it's time this lemonade stand got the recognition it deserves." He tore the check from the book and handed it to Ethan. Ethan unfolded the slip of paper, his small hands trembling slightly as he read the number written on it. His eyes widened and his mouth fell open. This is $50,000, he exclaimed, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire, who had been watching from a distance, bolted to her feet. $50,000? She repeated, her voice trembling as she rushed to Ethan's side. She glanced at the man, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't even know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. The man smiled, his rugged features softening. You've already said it, he replied. This little guy here, he's the one doing the real work. It was then that someone in the crowd murmured, Wait a minute, is that Clint Eastwood? The name rippled through the small group like a spark igniting dry leaves. Phones emerged, whispers turned to gasps, and soon everyone was craning their necks for a better look. Ethan looked at him curiously. Are you famous or something? He asked, tilting his head. Clint chuckled, crouching again so he could look Ethan in the eyes. A little bit, he said, his tone light, but not as famous as you're going to be, Ethan. The crowd laughed softly, the tension of the moment breaking into something warm and genuine. Clint reached out and gently patted Ethan's shoulder. You keep doing what you're doing, kiddo. The world could use more people like you. The donation jar was full, the check was written, and yet the encounter was far from over. What Clint Eastwood had just done was only the beginning of the impact he would leave behind. The air buzzed with energy as the realization set in. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and filmmaker, was standing at Ethan's little lemonade stand. Word spread quickly among the crowd that had gathered, and people began whispering excitedly, some snapping discreet photos or recording videos. Yet Clint seemed entirely unfazed, his focus fixed solely on Ethan and his family. Ethan stared down at the check in his hands, the bold number printed on it almost too overwhelming to comprehend. $50,000, he murmured, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and awe. Claire crouched beside her son, her hands shaking as she gently took the check to verify what her eyes were already telling her. Her breath hitched, and tears streamed down her face. This is incredible, she said, her voice breaking. I can't believe this. Clint smiled softly, his weathered face radiating a quiet kindness. It's not about the money, he said, his tone steady. It's about showing this little warrior that he's not alone. He's already done the hard part. He just needed a little push. As if on cue, the crowd broke into applause. Neighbors who had come to buy lemonade began stepping forward, inspired by the gesture they had just witnessed. Mr. Alvarez, the cheerful mailman, was the first to speak up. Ethan, he said, pulling a $50 bill from his wallet. I think Clint's got the right idea. Let's make sure you get everything you need. The domino effect was immediate. One by one, people reached into their pockets and purses, pulling out whatever they could spare. Some handed over $20 bills, others dropped crumpled 5s and 1s into the already full donation jar. A few even offered checks of their own, written on the spot. Ethan's stand, which had started the day with a modest goal, now felt like the center of something extraordinary. Claire could hardly keep up, tears spilling freely as she thanked each person who stepped forward. Ethan, meanwhile, stood behind his lemonade table, his face glowing with gratitude and a bit of wonder. Does this mean I don't have to sell lemonade anymore? Ethan asked with a shy giggle, his gaze darting back to Clint. Clint chuckled, the deep timbre of his laughter carrying over the crowd. You don't have to, kid, he said, crouching to meet his eyes again, but something tells me you're going to keep finding ways to make the world a little brighter. It's just who you are. The moment was electric, charged with the kind of hope that feels rare and precious. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Group photo!" And within minutes, neighbors were huddled together, smiling broadly with Ethan and Clint at the center. The picture, snapped by a local photographer, would later go viral, becoming a symbol of how a single act of kindness can inspire an entire community. By the end of the day, the total donations had surpassed $10,000 in cash, not including Clint's check. Ethan's modest lemonade stand had turned into a beacon of generosity, drawing out the best in everyone who stopped by. But Clint wasn't done. As the crowd began to disperse, he leaned in close to Claire and said quietly, "I've got some friends who'd like to help out, too. Don't be surprised if you hear from them in the next few days." Claire, still overwhelmed, nodded, her voice catching as she replied, "Thank you. You've changed our lives." Clint tipped an imaginary hat to her and stood, addressing the small crowd still lingering. "You've got a special little boy here," he said. "Take care of him and keep taking care of each other." With that, he turned and walked away, his leather jacket catching the late afternoon sunlight as he disappeared down the street. The neighborhood watched him go. The weight of what had just happened settled into their hearts, but the story wasn't over. The impact of Clint's generosity and the chain reaction it sparked was about to spread far beyond their small suburban street. In the days that followed Clint Eastwood's unexpected visit, Ethan's lemonade stand became the talk of Santa Clarita, and eventually the entire country. Photos and videos of the encounter, captured by neighbors and shared on social media, quickly went viral. News outlets picked up the story, with headlines celebrating the young boy with big dreams and Clint's incredible act of kindness. The image of Ethan standing proudly in front of his lemonade stand, holding his bright sign with a radiant smile, warmed hearts everywhere. At first, Claire and Brian were stunned by the sudden attention. Strangers began showing up at their door with donations, flowers, and cards for Ethan. Their mailbox was flooded with envelopes, many containing checks and letters of encouragement. One handwritten note from a little boy in Kansas read, "Dear Ethan, I saw your story and wanted to help. I don't have much, but I hope this $2 can make a difference. You're so brave. Love, Charlie, age 8. Ethan was deeply moved. He carefully placed the letter in a shoebox he had started filling with all the cards and notes he received, insisting to his mom that they keep every single one. "These people are helping me," he said one evening as he stacked the letters. "I want to remember them." But the story didn't just touch individuals. It caught the attention of local businesses and charities. A nearby hospital reached out, offering to cover any remaining medical expenses the family might face. A popular lemonade brand sent him a year's supply of their product, along with a heartfelt note. "Ethan, your bravery reminds us of the sweetness of life. Keep inspiring the world." Claire and Brian were amazed as their once overwhelming burden began to lift. The medical bills that had hung over them like a dark cloud were now being covered piece by the generosity of strangers. And it wasn't just financial aid. The community offered to help with meals, transportation, and even childcare. The ripple effect of Clint's kind act extended well beyond their neighborhood. Inspired by Ethan's story, other children began setting up their own lemonade stands, donating the proceeds to local hospitals and cancer charities. A movement started to take shape, with the hashtag #Hard Lemonade for Hope trending on social media. Stories poured in from across the country, kids raising money for loved ones, communities coming together, and even celebrities stepping forward to make donations in Ethan's name. Despite all the attention, Ethan stayed humble. One evening, as he sat on the living room floor with his parents, sorting through another pile of letters, he looked up and asked, "Do you think we can help other kids like me? Maybe we can do something even bigger." His words sparked an idea. With the extra funds they had raised, Claire and Brian helped Ethan start the Lemonade for Hope Foundation, an initiative dedicated to assisting families struggling with the costs of medical treatments. The foundation's mission was simple. No child should ever have to choose between fighting for their life and worrying about how to pay for it. The foundation's launch was quiet at first, but it didn't stay that way for long. Within weeks, donations began pouring in from across the globe. Schools organized lemonade stand fundraisers, businesses pledged matching donations, and communities took inspiration from Ethan's story to start their own efforts. One day, Ethan received a package from Clint Eastwood himself. Inside was a framed photo of the two of them at his lemonade stand, along with a handwritten note. "Keep fighting, kid. You're making the world a better place." Ethan's eyes lit up as he read the note aloud, his voice steady despite the emotions that welled up inside him. "I want to make him proud," he said softly, clutching the note to his chest. What had started as a simple lemonade stand had blossomed into a movement, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness can grow into something extraordinary. But for Ethan and his family, the journey wasn't just about the generosity they had received. It was about the new hope they could now offer to others. Months after that unforgettable day, life looked a little different for Ethan and his family. The constant worry etched on Claire and Brian's faces had softened, replaced by a sense of relief they hadn't felt in over a year. The overwhelming medical bills were no longer a looming threat, thanks to the generosity of neighbors, strangers, and one iconic actor who had stepped in when they needed it most. Ethan's health, while still a work in progress, was improving. His treatments continued, but with the financial burden eased, the family could focus on supporting him emotionally and physically. Ethan's spirit remained as bright as ever, and his lemonade stand became a cherished memory, not just for their family, but for everyone who had been a part of that remarkable day. But the story didn't end there. Ethan's foundation, Lemonade for Hope, grew faster than anyone had anticipated. What began as a small gesture of giving back had blossomed into a nationwide movement. Schools across the country joined in, hosting lemonade fundraisers and teaching kids about the power of kindness. Companies pledged matching donations, and families who had once struggled with medical expenses began receiving help from Ethan's initiative. The little boy who had once sat on a stool in his driveway was now an inspiration to thousands. He had become a symbol of resilience and compassion, proof that even the smallest voices can create echoes that reach far and wide. One day, during a local event celebrating the foundation's success, Ethan stood on a small stage, microphone in hand. His hands were still a little shaky, but full of confidence. The crowd, a mix of neighbors, volunteers, and supporters, watched as he took a deep breath and began to speak. "Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice clear and steady despite his young age. "When I started my lemonade stand, I just wanted to help my mom and dad. I didn't think so many people would care, but you did. And now we can help other kids like me. So thank you for believing in me." The applause was deafening. As Ethan stepped back from the microphone, Claire hugged him tightly, whispering, "You've made me so proud." At the back of the crowd, unnoticed by most, stood Clint Eastwood, dressed casually in a simple jacket and baseball cap. He watched with a small smile, his hands tucked into his pockets. He didn't need recognition or fanfare. He was there to quietly celebrate the young boy who had taken a simple act of generosity and turned it into a force for change. As the event came to a close, a reporter asked Ethan what he had learned through everything. He thought for a moment before answering. His words were simple, but profound. "I learned that it doesn't matter how big or small you are. You can always do something to help. And when people help each other, amazing things can happen." His answer became a rallying cry for the foundation, a message that resonated with people everywhere. Stories poured in of kids inspired by Ethan to start their own small acts of kindness, from bake sales to car washes, all with the goal of making the world a little brighter. The family never forgot the moment that changed their lives, the day a man in a leather jacket stopped at their lemonade stand and saw the heart behind a simple sign. And as Ethan's story continued to inspire, it reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, kindness and hope could light the way forward. If this story moved you, take a moment to think about how you can make a difference. No matter how small it may seem, share this story, inspire someone else, and remember that every act of kindness, big or small, can ripple out in ways you might never imagine. Thank you for watching till the end video. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories.